Hi, everyone. You all hear me? Everyone hear me? Yes? Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Cool. Well, welcome, everybody. It's so great to see so many faces here. I think I've met a lot of you in the elevator already, but I guess I can do a formal introduction. My name is Devin Chasanoff, and I'm a developer advocate here at Google. Part of our job, if you haven't figured that out already, is to make sure that you all have an awesome experience using this API. So it's really a pleasure for us to be here, meeting you, hearing how you use the API, learning about these interesting use cases, so that way we can continue to make that experience better for you. So as Adam mentioned, there's a lot of information today, everything from migrations, best practices, we have a code lab plan. But before we get into that, it's really important that we lay a foundation. And that's what this portion of the day is for. This is what we'll be going through, the agenda for this presentation. So first, we'll just talk about getting started. And this is kind of basic stuff, just account management, authentication. Then we'll move on to resources and services, which are kind of the building blocks of this API. And if you can understand the pattern that we use here, it'll be pretty easy for you moving forward in terms of implementing different functionality. Next, we'll talk about some special services. Namely, we'll talk about that special search service that we have, as well as some introspective discovery services. After that, we'll actually look at a quick example using the REST API. We'll take a deep dive into those developer tools. I know Adam promised a live demo. This is the presentation where we do it, so hopefully all goes well. And then finally, we'll have a brief preview of the client libraries before we open it up to some Q&A. So with that, let's jump in. In order to actually begin using the Google Ads API, what do you need? Well, first and foremost, a Google Ads Manager account. And if you're not familiar, this is the type of account that you can use to aggregate, view, and modify many accounts at once. And it's through this account that you'll create a developer token. You'll also need a client customer ID, which you'll get from your client account. So just to distinguish between the two, a client account is what you'll use to actually create advertisements. And a client account can have 0 or more managers. A manager can have 0 or more clients, and a manager account can even manage other manager accounts. Next, you'll need an OAuth 2 client ID and secret pair, which you'll then use to get an OAuth 2 access or refresh token. So let's take a look at what that process looks like. Oh, and before I move on, just quick show of hands, and sorry if Adam did this already, who are previous AdWords users? Okay, awesome. So you've probably gone through this flow already. If you have your credentials, I'll go through this quickly. If you have your credentials, you can use your same credentials. So that's the good news. You don't have to do this again. However, if you are using one of our client libraries, you may have to make some tweaks to your configuration file, such as changing the word AdWords to Google Ads. But that's all covered in the client library specific documentation. With that being said, the credentials themselves will stay the same. So since a lot of you already have your credentials, I'll go through this somewhat quickly. But the first step is obtaining a developer token. And this really grants you generic access to the API. It's not specific to your account. You'll hear this analogy later. It's kind of like a driver's license in that it enables you to drive many cars, not tied to one specific car. In order to create this, just head to that tools link. It's the reg icon at the top right of your screen, API Center, follow the prompts, and you'll get your developer token. Upon doing that, your developer token for the first time will have to be approved for production use. While you're waiting for that, you won't be able to make API calls to a production account, but you can still make API calls to a test account. Next, you'll obtain your OAuth 2 credentials, and you'll do so in the Google API console. Now, keep in mind, this API console is not specific to Google Ads. It is the same API console you might use for any other Google API. However, you will have to enable the Google Ads API in the API library. After doing that, head over to the credentials page, click Create Credentials, follow the flow there, and for most cases, the installed application type is okay. Once you've gone through that, you'll have a client ID as well as a client secret, which you'll need for the next step, obtaining your OAuth 2 access or refresh tokens. So if your developer token is kind of like a driver's license, you can think of your access token as similar to a key to a specific car. But that key dissolves every hour, which wouldn't be great for an actual car. But that's why we have refresh tokens, because if you use one of our client libraries along with a refresh token, it'll automatically generate new access tokens for you. So you don't actually have to worry about this authentication process every single time you're making API calls. So you'll actually go through this process a little bit later in the code lab, making a request with the HTTP method. However, the easiest way to actually obtain these refresh and access tokens is by using the client-specific libraries. So if you look at your favorite library, head over to the examples folder, there will be an authentication subdirectory. In there, there will be a file called authenticate in standalone application. So let's look at how we do this in PHP, for example. Simply run that application. You'll enter in your client ID as well as your client secret that you generated. And upon doing that, you'll be presented with a prompt like this. It'll say, paste this URL into your browser. You click the URL. Then you can log into your account. Keep in mind the account that you log in with and the email that you log in with is the email associated with that access or refresh token. So once you've logged in, you'll allow Google Ads API access to your Google account. Out pops an authorization code. You'll paste that into the prompt, at which point you will finally get your access and refresh token. Hooray, you're now able to make API calls. You'll enter that into your configuration file within your client-specific library. By default, these generally live in your home directory, but you can specify where you want it to live and just point to where that folder, that file is. And at that point, you are ready to make API calls. So I know that was a lot, but once you get through that, it's a lot more fun working with the API. All right, so now that we know what accounts we need and what authentication looks like in Google Ads API, let's take a look at resources and services, which, as I mentioned before, are the building blocks of the API. So a resource within Google Ads is a conceptual entity within the product, within the platform, right? That's anything like a campaign, a customer, an ad group, a keyword. And within the client libraries, these are represented by objects. And these entities and objects also encapsulate all the information about that particular resource. For example, if you were looking at a campaign, this would include the campaign name, network settings, advertising channel, and so forth. One of the big changes between AdWords API and Google Ads API is how we identify each unique resource. Whereas in the AdWords API, we use IDs, in Google Ads, we use this concept of resource names. And if you've used a RESTful API, this should look pretty familiar to you. But a resource name is a string with a structure that looks like the middle of the screen here, which is customers with an ID, campaigns, and then the campaign ID. Instead of campaigns, that could be any sort of resource. And what's really nice about this is if you append that resource name to the base URL and path, it begins to look like a URL that follows conventional REST patterns. So it's very easy to understand what's going on here. So if a resource is one of those conceptual entities that we are interacting with, services provide a mechanism by which to actually interact with those resources. How do we retrieve them, create them, update, or remove them? So each resource will, many resources have services, and they have a name that looks like you'll see here. So for example, the customer resource has a customer service, campaign resource, campaign service. Should be pretty easy to follow. And each service client has different methods associated with it. So for example, if you were in the documentation and you went to the references section, the references tab, on the top left of your screen, you'd see a tab for a link to all the services. You can find the campaign service, and you'd see all the methods available to you for the campaign service, one of which is mutate campaigns. And mutate is how you would do any operation that is add, create, or update, everything but search. And every mutate method will have a similar signature. It'll be called mutate resource. So this accepts a mutate campaign's request. It returns a mutate campaign's response. So what goes into that mutate campaign's request? So there's a lot going on in this slide. Hopefully it'll make sense by the end. But if you can understand this conceptual pattern, making API calls to any resource will be very straightforward for you. At that point, it'll just be a matter of understanding what resource you want to interact with and then looking at the documentation for syntax and attributes related to that resource. So let's work our way left to right. So the first thing you'll do is you'll create a campaign operation, or an operation generally for any resource. In this case, it'll be a campaign operation, which is comprised of a resource, in this case, our campaign. We'll then set an operation to that resource, such as set, create, update, or remove. And this is similar to the AdWords API if you've used this in the past. However, the syntax is a little more concise, so a little less code. It's always good for everybody. And then finally, in the Google Ads API, we introduced this concept of a field mask, which you'll learn a bit more about later. But the basic premise here is that you can let the API know which fields you'll be updating in a mutate call, which makes life a lot easier when you're passing in if you only want to update, say, one specific field or two specific fields for a given resource. So we package all of those together into a single campaign operation, which we then pass into our middle box, the request. So this is the mutate campaign's request parameter that we saw on the previous page. It's comprised of a customer ID as well as an array of operations. So you'll hear more about this in the best practices deck, but using this array is a great way to batch operations together. That prevents you from making multiple requests to the API server. And what's great about this is that operations array is atomic, so they'll either all go through or none of them will go through. Next, we package that in. We send that to our method as shown on the previous page, which is our service client, and out pops your response. So if you can kind of follow that pattern, the entire API, every mutate more or less follows this pattern. So if you can follow this, you'll be in great shape. So now we've covered what resources and services are, as well as how to make mutate requests. So one thing I'll note is that if you did follow what I was saying and went to the campaign service, you'll see that there were two methods there. There was a mutate campaigns method as well as a get campaigns method. For any of these methods, we do not recommend using that get method in production. It's really only meant for testing and development. Instead, as Adam alluded to, we have a special service for searching and reporting. So instead of using a specific resource client to retrieve information from the Google Ads API server, instead what you'll do is use a special service called the Google Ads client service. And that service has a special search method, which you pass in a query string that is made up of the Google Ads query language that you've heard all about already. And the query language looks something like this. You just select what fields you want to look at from the entity resource, specify any conditions, and then you can order or limit your results. So in the example here, we're selecting a campaign ID and name from campaign, and then we'll order by campaign ID. Pretty straightforward. So one caveat here, I know this looks a little bit like SQL. It's not SQL. The good news is if you've used a query language, this should be pretty straightforward to you. However, if you try to use all of SQL's functionality, it won't work, so I wouldn't try. So for example, the select star operator isn't supported here. And we'll talk a little bit later about why that is. In addition, we don't support joins, but we've kind of built this query language in a way that it's implicitly supported in that you can actually select child resources from a given resource or even metrics, and we'll cover that in the next slide. In addition, we don't support group by, but using segments, as I'll show you in just a second, you can actually get that functionality as well. So As you'll hear throughout the day, you're going to use this both for just retrieving a single item as well as general reporting. Instead of using many different reports, you just use this exact same service client with that search method and a query string. So when you're looking at reporting, you'll probably want to get some metrics such as clicks, page views, and so forth. You'll also want to take a look at segments, which is a great way to group or filter your results. So in the example here, you can see we're, in addition to campaign name and status, we're also getting metrics.impressions, clicks, and CTR. And as you can see here, you don't have to do any fancy joins. It's all included. All you have to do is just put that additional criteria into your select query. In addition, like I said, group by, you can use segments.device here. Makes your life a lot easier. And then finally, in that where clause, we can filter our results by date to just see the last 30 days. When you run a query like this, you'll get the result that you get will be a unique row for every combination of the main resource and segmented values. So this is all good and well. Google Ads query language sounds pretty awesome, right? But how do you know what fields are available to you? How do you know how to use it? Lots of great resources and tools for you. First and foremost, of course, you can look at the docs, always a great place to start. On the bottom left of the resources tab is a list of all the fields you can explore at your leisure. We also have a REST discovery API. If you look at this endpoint here, there's a $ discovery there. And you can actually click that if you want, if you're following along. And you'll actually see a JSON response of all of the resources and methods available to you in the entire API. And it's machine readable if, for example, you want to generate some sort of query on the fly. Finally, the Google Ads introduces a new service called the Google Ads Field Service, which you can use to find out information about a particular resource. So in this example here, we have Google Ads fields along with campaign, and that will return the fields, metrics, and segments available on the campaign resource. And you'll actually do this a little bit later in the code lab. I should note this does require authentication, whereas if you've clicked the middle link, the Discovery API does not. So now we know how to search with the Google Ads API and also do reporting, which is one and the same. We've also seen how to learn more about queries. So let's look at a quick example using the Google Ads API with REST. So as you've heard by now, and you'll hear many times, the new API is built using gRPC, but we do expose a functionally equivalent REST API, which accepts JSON as an input and will give you JSON as an output. One thing to note, if you are using that API, there is a little bit of a difference between a conventional RESTful API and what you'll do here, in that you for the most part, won't use verbs like get, put, patch, and delete. You'll almost always use post. And then you'll specify the verb, search, or mutate at the end of the endpoint. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So here, don't worry about digging into the details. You'll do this in the code lab. But you can see we're making a post request to our base URL plus our customer's resource name. And then we're hitting the Google Ads service client and searching. Got all that authentication information we got earlier, our query string at the bottom, and out pops a JSON response. Awesome. So now we know how to actually make API calls. Let's take a look at some of the tools that will make your life easier, especially as you get up the learning curve. So first, my awesome teammate Corey over there, he actually built this Google Ads Query Builder. So this is a tool for you to learn more about what fields will be available to you when constructing those query strings. And rather than, we have the docs, Discovery API, and the fields resource. We've given you one more tool here, and this is a UI-based product hosted on our developer site. And the beauty here is that you can start with the resource that you want to look at, and then you'll be provided with drop-down menus only containing the criteria that are actually available to you based on that specific resource. So rather than keep talking about this, let's try a live demo. All right. So hang with me here because this setup is a little more complicated than it looks. All right. Excellent. Okay, here we are. Excellent. So you can actually navigate to this yourself. The link's in the presentation. And as I said earlier, you come in here, select your resource. So for example, if I were to select campaign, now when I select the drop-down fields, I'll see all of the attributes available to me to select. And this also includes child attributes as well as metrics and segments available to you. So we'll come in here. I'll try to do this quickly. So let's say we want to look at campaign ID, campaign name. That's usually pretty important. Then maybe we'll look at seem to be frozen on me. Oh, live demos, am I right? Cool. Well, for the sake of speeding things up, I will just move on. So in here, we'll select what filters we want. Okay. All right. Yes, that's probably right. Yeah. All right, take two. Try again. Campaign. We'll just do, I'll just do name this time because it's right here. Now you can see the metrics we have available to us. So let's look at, for example, average CPC. We'll select a filter. So here, maybe we'll only look at let's say we only want to look at campaign.status is enabled because we only want to look at our active campaigns. This green button to add. And cool. Now at the bottom here, this is what you've all been waiting for, anxiously. We have our query text. So if you see this button here, I can copy. And now what I can do is just paste this exact query string into the curl request or even the client library. You can see this makes query building a lot easier. It's actually a lot easier when you don't have 100 people looking at you. But this should be a great tool for you to get to learn. So the next tool, and I'm just going to stay on this slide, is the Google Web Navigation tool that Adam referred to earlier. Bear with me here. This guy. And I'll show you how it works. But basically, the premise here is, as Adam said, if you're already in the UI, you're looking at a particular resource, you want to learn more about it, right? You want some guides, you want some documentation. If you have this Chrome extension installed, simply click on the extension when you're logged in, and it'll give you pointers to all of those resources. So let's take a look. So as you can see here, I'm logged into an account. And because of that, this Chrome extension here is active. Now, if I were to go to campaigns, you can see all these really interesting campaigns that we're running here. And if we were to click on that icon, you can see now we have links to guides, fields, and so forth. And you can see, especially as you're learning about new features, how this could be really useful to you. Okay. Excellent. All right, live demos. Yes. So now that we've done that, brief intro to our client libraries. because you'll have an entire presentation on this later, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I will say this is the preferred way to access the API. As Adam mentioned, the client libraries all utilize gRPC, and if you are using the client libraries, you get the benefits of the new technology. However, it's all, for the most part, abstracted away from you, so you don't really have to worry about the details. So we support 5 libraries: Java, PHP, Python, Ruby, and .NET. And if you're using them and you follow that auth flow that we went through earlier, you can save your credentials in a configuration file, and then you won't really have to worry about authenticating every time you want to make an API call. You can just worry about implementing the application logic that you're building with the API. Finally, they're all open source. They're all available on GitHub. If you do want to contribute, maybe examples or questions or anything like that, we, of course, love hearing from the community. All right, and this wouldn't be complete without a resources slide, which is also a great opportunity to kind of recap what we've went through in this presentation. First and foremost, getting started. If you didn't follow any of the flows, authentication, or even just understanding the resources and services model, this is a great place to start: the Google Ads developer site, as well as the API reference. We also have a link here to the query language to learn more about the query language, though by now it seems like you should all be experts. We also have developer tools that we just went through, such as the interactive query builder, the web navi, as well as the REST discovery API. And then on the right are links to all of our open source client library repositories on GitHub.